You hear so many different things about adoption that it makes you nervous, all the negative stories, you know. Maybe 60–70% of the time they fail.
You show the child that you love him and that he's human, he'll surprise the world. But you gotta have another thing you must have above all things, and that's patience. You must exercise patience.
I was born in Lewisburg Hospital, and my family lived in Milton, Pennsylvania. Growing up in the 50s and the 60s, my family was on the poor side. I was the third child of three. I was born because my father was in the war and had just come home, and there was difference of how they parented the children and everything, so I was kind of supposed to be the baby to bring the family back together. We were raised surrounded by the church. My father was very active in the church. My father worked at a grocery store. My mother worked in a yarn mill. I was very shy when I was a child. I struggled in school. I was in the lower classes, but I still worked hard and studied and continued to pass each grade, because I did my homework and was attentive in class, so that helped me get through school. In our high school, we only had a few African American students, and most of them were in sports. And I know that I asked my parents, I was very confused why people judged them differently because of their color. Because on the field, they praised these students for their abilities to play, but off the team or outside of the team, then they weren't considered equal to the white students in the classroom. And that always bothered me. Well, I was probably about 10 or 11 when a neighbor gave us a TV. It needed a new tube, so she gave it to us for free, so then we just bought the tube so it would work. And that was something special because we hadn't had that before. We did have TV, but we didn't watch it that much, and I don't remember that much of the civil rights activities that went on during that time. And because I often wondered, I knew that I had feelings for everybody being equal, but I don't know if I could have been brave enough to go out and stand up for what I believed in. My first job out of school was working for a veterinarian. I worked in the kennel and started doing some dog grooming and assisting with x-rays and that type of work that went on in the office. I also, during my downtime in the kennel, I took care of the vet's kids. She had 2 young children. The husband and wife were both vets, and the husband worked away at Princeton University during the day, so it was just the wife and I running the kennel and taking care of the kids. And then I tried a job in key punching, which was brand new back in those days. And I had gone to classes for it, and I had the same trouble I had in school. I knew what I was doing, but I couldn't prove it on a test. But I did pass the requirements, and during my training, I helped other kids that had trouble, or I should say adults that had trouble getting through the material. I could help them. But I had trouble finding a job because, again, I had to go out and sell myself to an employer, and I was shy, so I didn't know how to do that. So I went back to kennel work. And then I went to a company that made centrifuge materials, built the machines, and started out in clerical. And then I went into international shipping. Then I did credit collection, and I stayed there for a couple years and worked part-time in a movie theater. And when an opening came up, I was offered a manager job in a movie theater, a triplex. If the movies didn't come in on time, well, even if they did come in on time, they would be delivered to the front door, and I would have to carry the canisters upstairs for the projectionists. And they weighed an average of 75 pounds each, and you had to carry them up the steps to the operating room. And I also eventually got my license to run the machines myself. That was the start of things that were more automatic. You could program to do things. And at that time, they were on individual. You had two different type of machines. One machine, you had to change the reel that had the film on it every so many minutes. And if you missed it, it would click and it would go. The screen would go black. So you had to get your cues to change it. The other machine was a big round machine that held the whole film on one big round disc. After each show was finished, you took the center out and placed it on a different disc. There was 3 of them altogether, and rethread the machine, and it would go through one disc and onto the next disc. And you had to put your films together because they came in a canister with only 40 minutes play on there, and you got your advertisements and stuff. So you had to splice them all together and put your film together before you could start your show. I was 39 years old when I had my firstborn child, Heather. She changed my world. I had somebody that I could love and gave love back. Same thing most people say, that's why they want a baby, is because they don't feel loved and they think they're going to get it when they get a child. Of course, all the work and responsibility goes along with it is a lot to take into also. It goes back to my feeling lonely and somewhat misunderstood because of my shyness. I felt that I had something I could offer children who didn't have parents or whose parents were taken away. And so I wanted to get into foster care. The hopes of adopting was there, but there was no guarantee, being a single parent, that I could adopt. So when it came to picking a child, you kind of got what children were available. But I was interested in African American children, and there was a lot of families that weren't as open to them, so I felt this was an avenue that I could serve and do something worthwhile in life. And so I started fostering children. Heather was 5 when I got my first little baby. He was 3 weeks old, and his name was Josiah. And he was from a hospital in Philadelphia, and I had to travel down to Philadelphia to bring him home. And he was so small that Heather could hold him like a little baby doll, and was quite proud of her brother. And so that was the start of my fostering. Josiah was about 4 when he became available for adoption, and I gladly went forward and adopted him. When Josiah came along, initially not much was said because he started out as a foster child. There was one time later when he was, before he was adopted, that my mother asked to have Heather come visit them for a week down where they lived, because at that time I lived in Wellsboro and they lived in Hatboro. And my mother said, is it possible that we can just have our granddaughter come and not have Josiah come? And Heather spoke up and said, if my brother isn't welcome in your house, either am I, and I refuse to come. So you got to go to visit your grandmother. One nice thing that happened, my stepfather was at the time considered prejudiced, and once he got to know Josiah, he loved him so much, and he changed his views. He started to realize that you have to judge people for who they are and not what color they are. Throughout my experience with foster care and adopting, I partially raised 4 sets of twins. 2 of those sets I adopted, and the other 2 went on to other foster parents or to be adopted by other people. And all I raised about 13 children. Some of the children had more medical issues than others. One of my set of twins was born at 24 weeks gestation, and so they were quite premature and not really expected to live. I was supposed to take care of them until we figured out what was going to happen with them. Despite all their issues with cerebral palsy and deafness and blindness, my one daughter, Chelsea, was 24 when she died, and which I think was pretty good since she wasn't expected to live to start with. The one thing I am proud of is I was so nervous in school, and so I wasn't an A student naturally, and I never thought I had any ability to follow instructions and everything, but I prayed a lot about what needed to be done, and when it came time, I knew what to do for the children and how to take care of them. A lot of times Chelsea would have issues during the night, and I'd have to stay up all night with her to make sure she was still breathing and clear the congestion out of her G-tube and anything else she needed to have take care of. We live in an old farmhouse. It's over 100 years old, and we've lived here for about 27 years. I've raised 13 children in this house. The space was great and entertaining for the kids. Had doors on all the rooms downstairs, so we removed the doors when we moved here so the kids could run around in circles and get their energy out of them. And we had great times with doing crafts. We have almost an acre of ground, so the kids played soccer in the field and hide and seek and had a lot of fun outside. And so we had a great time here. We went to church all this time in the early days. First a church in Wellsboro, where some of the people weren't as acceptant of more issue of my daughter and how I had her. Heather was conceived by artificial insemination at the doctor's, and so it wasn't accepted by everybody how I conceived her. And I was approached by a woman one day at church, and she said, "Do you think that you're going to hell because you had your daughter the way you did?" And I said, "I only have to answer to God." And I prayed a lot about it, and it worked for us, and I have to accept that that's what was meant for me to be. And if I hadn't had my daughter, I wouldn't have had the nerve or the confidence to get into foster and adoption and take care of other children. It was hard sometimes because I had to learn names of medicines and the dosage and how it affected each child. You had to be able to advocate for your child when you went to the doctor's office. They saw many patients a day, but they didn't see your child. You were the one that knew how your child was responding to the meds and what wasn't being answered by the doctors that would give your child a better quality of life. So you had to fight sometimes with doctors what was right to be done. I'm proud of my kids that worked through their problems. It's hard for foster or adopted children when they start hitting their teens. They start getting more questions in their mind about where they came from, why their parent isn't there. Specifically with my children, even though not all of them are African American, the children that are wonder why they're in a white home being black, and so it's hard to keep up with what they need, their hair care and skin care. So these are all things that have to go into it. And again, for me having had so much trouble in school and everything, I'm proud that I at least went out of my way to find the needs of my children and try to fulfill what they needed to be successful in life.